Yesterday I did a video talking about the importance of creating meaningful work, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. And the reason I'm doing these videos is I want to hopefully provide some inspiration and some enthusiasm to create things. And we live in a world that does seem very oversaturated with plenty of photographers, plenty of images, and a lot of noise to cut through. And it's also a very fast-paced environment too, with social media and kind of the cycle of everything. And one of the things that I think is important is to understand what it means to create meaningful works. And I want to talk about what that is, and I want to talk about the time and care that it takes to do those things, because I think that is really important, and it's something that I think our culture doesn't have much patience for, but it's important to understand and it's important to embrace. And when I'm talking about meaningful works, I'm obviously saying, meaningful works could be something that means something to you. That's why most of us get into photography or creating anything for that matter. There's a personal enthusiasm, excitement, expectation, maybe you set a personal bar and you're trying to get better and reach that, and that's fine. But I'm really talking about meaningful works on a much larger scale in the context of culture. In the context of, if you're able to create something, you have the power to make something that can make somebody think. It can create awareness for something. It can just create positivity and make somebody feel better about something. I mean, there's an enormous power that we have in creating something. And that talent takes a lot of time to build up. And I think that we live in a culture, especially if you look at something like the music business, where it tends to celebrate young prodigies and old legends. So you either need to be Justin Bieber or you need to be Miles Davis. There's really not much in between. And one of the things that I really like about photography is less so in that regard. In fact, I think it's quite the norm to understand that most people, especially in the fine art world, and I think the commercial world as well, tend to come into their own in their careers when they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's not unusual, and that's usually when you start to see the best work happen. And so I think it's important to realize there is no rush. I think it's also important to understand that even like very iconic works throughout the history of art, they're always a culmination. So for instance, if you take the Mona Lisa, for instance, well, Da Vinci didn't just decide to do a painting one day that was going to become famous, and he did it and that was it. That painting was the culmination of years of study and learning how to draw and hand skills, learning how to paint and trial and error and all these things that came before that to lead up to that one piece. And you can say that for any work. About a month ago, or about 2 months ago, I was in New York and I had the wonderful privilege of getting to meet Ralph Gibson, who's a wonderful photographer, certainly somebody I look up to. My friend Thierry hooked me up into that, and we went over there and we were talking to Ralph. And Ralph speaks very eloquently like this, and it is something that he thinks about. It's the relationship of your work from one image to another. It's coming up with a visual language, and I think the term Ralph used was visual algorithm, that speaks across image to image year after year, and you end up culminating in this body of work that you have during your career. Culture tends to pick out iconic works and things, and that's beyond your control. I mean, if you look at Robert Frank and the Americans, for instance, and interestingly enough, Ralph Gibson used to work for Robert Frank. He assisted on some of the movies, and he's known for that work of art. But that work of art, when you see what made that meaningful, the Americans, that was a project that was a culmination. It was informed. It had intelligence behind it. It had something to say. It was of its time. It was of the zeitgeist of the 1950s and America at that time, and it worked. And it was a complete home run. And he's really defined by that body of work because it really was that meaningful, I think, on a number of levels. And so I think it's important to understand that, this doesn't happen overnight. Things take time. There is a wonderful film that I want to recommend to you. It has nothing to do with photography, but about craft. And it's a film that was done in 2012 called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. You may have seen it. It is a documentary about a sushi chef in Japan who is world-renowned. He has a restaurant that only seats a handful of people, and it is booked, I think it's like 2 years in advance. It's very expensive. You have to book it years out, and then you go and you eat, and it's this whole production that goes on, and it is the finest sushi, supposedly, that is served anywhere in the world. And what's interesting about the documentary is they really get behind the passion, and I love it when food gets poetic like that, but the passion behind that craft and what it takes to actually go to the market, handpick the fish. Some of the younger assistants that come on board, for the first 10 years of their career, all they do is cook rice. That's it. And when you hear something like that, it's very Eastern in its approach. And I find it fascinating because the whole point is that you spend a long time learning a craft that is going to be meaningful and make sense. And the idea is that you transcend once you have put in the hours and the time spent to get that right. But I will recommend, I'll put that video in the show description, and I recommend that you guys check it out. It used to be on Netflix. I don't know if it still is, but watch it. It is excellent. But I think that's important to understand, and I think it's something that is not obvious or prevalent in our culture and society right now. Is I think we're very hurried. I think things are impatient. I think it's a subject for another video, but if you look at the cycle of social media and where we are headed with photography outlets that we can put our work, I mean, it's a quick cycle, it's a fast turnaround, and things get really difficult, I think, when you start looking at it in that scheme of things. And of course, photography extends beyond social media, but my point is that, you know, we are in an age where the cycle is much faster, but you still need to be patient. You need to learn the craft, and you need to put in the hours that it takes. And you need to understand that that's a gift. The ability to make things, seriously. Think about that for a second. Whether you make movies, whether you make art, whether you draw, whether you paint, whether you take photographs, whether you make sculpture, whether you dance, whether you write, whatever it is, the act of creating, it represents the ultimate human freedom. I mean, it represents the freedom of thought. There's an enormous gift that comes with that. And you should be excited about it, and you should try to take that to the next level, and you should realize the power of what that can do. Anyway, these are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys have to think, so please leave me a comment. And if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to like it, share it with your friends, and as always, subscribe to The Art of Photography for more videos, and I will see you in the next one. Later.